Abu Dhabi. So the floor is yours.
Okay. Thanks, Nick, and thank you, everybody. Indeed, I've picked up the same sentiment myself, that air traffic management is a topic of the day. So I'm delighted to be moderating this particular session. It's entitled Airspace Management and Air Traffic Control, looking at international solutions for a regional bottleneck. And we have an excellent panel to address this particular topic with us. Starting immediately on my left here, Kelly Ortberg is the President and CEO of Rockwell Collins. Previously, he'd run the government systems and commercial systems at Rockwell Collins since he joined the company in 1987 as a program manager, and has been responsible for developing and launching innovative product lines, transforming both commercial and military operations. So I'll be asking Kelly about civil military issues in a little while. Then on his left, Ahmed Ibrahim Jallaf is Assistant Director of Air Navigation Services at GCAA. Started as an air traffic controller and has held several senior positions with GCAA. In his current role, he oversees ATM, CNS, AIM, ANSP training, quality and safety management departments. So he has all of the acronyms under his responsibility there. But really delighted to have Ahmed on the panel, because he's also chairman of the UAE National Airspace Advisory Committee, chairman of the CAO Middle East ATM Enhancement Program, and he's acting chairman of the Arab Civil Aviation Commission Air Navigation Committee. So, welcome. And then further left, Pascale Sourrisse is Senior Executive Vice President at Thales, responsible for international development. She's previously held senior positions at Alcatel, France Telecom, and the French Industry Ministry, amongst others. So her career covers space activities as well as land, defense, and security systems. So welcome, Pascale. Last but not least, on the far left, your right, is Richard Deakin, the CEO of NATS in the UK. Richard has previously held senior positions at BAE Systems and Thales, and has expanded the scope of NATS well beyond the UK, and is particularly proactive here in the Middle East region, so very relevant to today's debate. Now, one of the things that I mentioned this morning is that air traffic management is invisible, should be invisible, but shouldn't be forgotten. And one of the things that I know many people have difficulty with is actually visualizing what air traffic management is all about. So we're going to take a couple of minutes out of this discussion period with a video, and I'd like Richard to, if you could open up by introducing the video for us.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. One of the problems that I think all of us have is visualizing the infrastructure in the airspace. We all are very familiar with the infrastructure on the ground in terms of airports, and of course the infrastructure in the air in terms of aircraft. But I hope that this 2-minute video will bring to light some of the challenges of the particularly complex airspace in this region. It covers a 24-hour period, and it's in 2 minutes, so you're going to have to hang on to the ride because the aircraft go very fast. Thanks, okay. Jeff.
Thank you. If you could roll the video, thanks. Okay, thank you. So there you have one day in the life of air traffic management in the Middle East. I think very very interesting picture there. It certainly shows the hubs of activities and also some empty spaces, if I may put it that way. As we move forward, we know that many of the problems here in the Middle East are faced by other regions, but I would like to explore with the panel here, what can we do to unlock the bottlenecks in this particular region, and what lessons are there from other regions in the world and indeed other associated industries. As has been mentioned before, the Middle East is the world's fastest growing region for aviation. We're seeing the opening of new high-capacity airports in Doha, Dubai, and so on. But what is failing to keep pace is the organisation of the region's airspace. As I mentioned this morning, it's fragmented, creating safety, efficiency, and environmental and capacity challenges for the regions. It's saturated with large parts out of bounds for civilian use. And it's uncoordinated, strong word, uncoordinated at the regional level. And unless these areas are addressed, we see that they will act as a major constraint to further growth and expansion. So air traffic management isn't just an aviation and an aerospace issue, it is one for the region and the economies as a whole. So I'd like the panel to address how the decision makers in the region can put an end to this fragmented approach, the fragmented initiatives, the duplication of efforts, military restrictions and so on, and develop a coherent, coordinated regional way forward for efficient airspace management. And therefore to ensure that everything we do moving forward in air traffic management in this region will meet the needs of the growing market. So I've got some specific areas that I'd like to throw out for the panel to consider as they're discussing. First of all, how do we ensure partnership and cooperation? You know, this is at the heart of the problem, and for really the transformation of ATM performance is only possible with the support and involvement of everybody. States, airspace users, airports, air navigation service providers, military organizations, international organizations. And yet, as we know, cross-border cooperation is not necessarily a natural phenomenon in this part of the world that will happen without deliberate effort. So, partnership and cooperation. Secondly, how do we actually achieve seamless airspace in the Middle East? Aviation business must transcend national boundaries, and air traffic management needs to be organized in the way that it should be around traffic flows, not regional boundaries. But can we in this region in particular, can we really move away from the one state, one air navigation service provider model? Again, that's not something that is intuitive in this region. Are there more efficient ways to service provision? Should states be working more closely with each other, delegating airspace responsibilities and so on? Thirdly, does the structure here actually inhibit transformation? Does responsibility for both regulation and service provision in the same organization act as a barrier? In Europe and elsewhere, there's a very strong belief that service provision and regulation should be separated. And I know there's, again, a very different view in this region. I think, Nat, I'd be interested in particular in Ahmed's views and Richard's views, because Richard has been through a change in the model there. Fourth, how can we get this better cooperation between the civil and military sides of the aviation business and really overcome the constraints caused by the military airspace restrictions? And what can we learn from other regions about that, other practices between the civil and military elsewhere? And finally, will technology in our industry drive the necessary changes and overtake all of these other issues? We know there's some amazing technology available in air traffic management today, and more coming, that will serve to harmonize systems and processes and traffic flows in a global way without reference to national borders or even land-based equipments. So, a little bit like mobile phones have replaced the old-fashioned phone boxes on every street corner, will technology be the revolution to free the Middle East of its present fragmentation and ATM constraints, or will it be the other way around? Will the use of technology be subdued and constrained by these present barriers? to seamless airspace and efficiency. So there are some of the issues, I think. We debated on some of them this morning. So I'd like to kick off with a panel discussion now. Please send your questions through. I've got the iPad here that I can take questions on. It's very important, I think, given the level of interest that's been expressed already from you as conference participants, that we don't just have the debate on the floor here. But we'll kick this off, and I think it's only appropriate to ask Ahmed, this is your region, you're the expert here. What are your reflections on all of the issues that have come up in the conference so far, and how do we make the regional cooperation work much more effectively?
First, thank you, Jeff. I'm actually very pleased to hear today that the term air traffic management has been repeated over and over again, which gives me the opportunity to share some of our knowledge and experience about our activities in the UAE and the Middle East region to the participants of the summit. The term airspace congestion, airspace management is normally misused or misinterpreted. It is a component of the overall terminology, which is the air traffic management or air traffic management capacity, which consists of both the airspace and the airport. It's normally one feeds the other. So the balance between the airport capacity together with the airspace capacity makes the air traffic management capacity. Mm-hmm. And this is something very important for the audience and for the public to know as well. In the UAE, we have a very small size airspace compared to the density of the traffic. As it was very well stated, 49% of it is very much for military airspace. However, we do have many initiatives with the military authorities to push the flexible use of airspace initiatives forward. The UAE FIR was started back in 1986 with the 342 movements. Today we manage very much around 2,200 movements per day through 9 air traffic control sectors. We started looking at the air traffic management efficiency and safety a few years back, and we started to work together through a collaborative manner and strategic CDM, collaborative decision-making strategic level, through the establishment of a National Airspace Committee. Mm-hmm. Consists of all the stakeholders of regulators, service providers, airports, airlines, as well as the military authority. And we have achieved a lot. However, we realized later on that the issue of the airspace, we cannot work in isolation. We have to work collaboration with the region together. There were so many fragmented initiatives and isolated initiatives throughout the Middle East region by organizations like CANSO, IATA, individual states. However, they were isolated initiatives until we have decided to take the lead and proposed to the aviation industry last year the establishment of a regional program called the Middle East ATM Enhancement Program, which is a regional consolidated program, takes together all the various initiatives and all the various proposals being presented by the various entities. And it was agreed by the Director General of Civil Aviation in the Middle East to go ahead and establish the program and establish a board for the program. The first meeting of the program was last February, which I had the honor of being elected as the chairman of such a program. The program is very ambitious. It will consist of various projects, tackle various issues to ensure harmonization of the ATM seamless operations and very much ensure safety and efficiency in the air traffic management. So I will not spend too much time. I know the discussion will go on, but I'll give the opportunity to other members to go ahead and express their opinion.
Okay, thank you. That's a very good introduction. I'll move next, logically, I think, to Richard as another air navigation service provider, a very notable one within the European context, and as I said earlier, seeking to expand its activities and support air traffic management in other parts of the world. So Richard, how do you see the development of air traffic management here in the Middle East, and what do you think are the potential solutions that may be brought in from other parts of the world to support the activities here?
Thanks, Jeff. I think the Middle East is on a very similar journey to Europe and indeed to other parts of the world where we see that very rapid growth in air traffic. I think Ahmed hit a key point earlier when he was talking about the importance of not just airspace but airports as well. And I think one of the key things for unlocking some of the inefficiencies in the airspace is to recognize that this is actually a value chain, as I think one of the previous panelists said. So you can't just solve one part of it and hope that suddenly a miracle will occur and everything will then become super efficient. And I think one of the challenges that we've found in Europe is that whilst a lot of the technology exists, whether it's collaborative decision-making or flow management, actually pulling that together in a fairly challenging political context is really where the prize lies. So it's not just about how efficient you are in your own country, it's about how efficient you are at the borders and how efficient your neighbours are. And I think that really is the key for unlocking some of the challenges that we see today. Certainly from a European point of view, there have been some interesting initiatives with functional airspace blocks. I guess from a personal point of view, the limitation with these FABs is that they are political bodies. They are not created by air navigation service providers. ANSPs have been forced into FABs that sometimes don't create particularly harmonious groups. And I think the challenge, and if I was to offer any perspectives for this region, I think the challenge is to try and create operational groups, if you like, as Ahmed has been doing with the initiatives that he has been talking about, where everyone drives to a common set of customer-focused ambitions. And one of the things that we've found in Europe to get things working is to pick specific projects. So things like city pairs, you know, on particularly busy routes, or a particular piece of military airspace that is causing a lot of inefficiencies. And I think the challenge is to try and get some momentum going, but to do that very much on an international basis rather than just to have countries focusing on their own.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. And certainly, I think you saw from the panel this morning, there was a view that says, whatever you do, don't copy Europe and the single European sky. And I think fundamentally that's because the institutional and political side of Europe has actually now got in the way of air traffic management. The project that was designed to make everything happen is now actually a significant obstacle in its own right. So, you know, again, I think a very strong plea from the industry and here in the Middle East would be, don't create a mega project with institutions and political organizations overseeing it, because we know what to do operationally, and allowing that to happen, as Richard was just saying, I think is a key way forward. Pascale, what is Thales's experience in dealing with congestion issues and air traffic management? And you know, do you see any magic solutions here? Can Thales wave a magic wand for us and solve all of our problems?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Rather than magics, we prefer, I would say, two words, technology and cooperation between players. Well, Thales certainly has a very long experience in dealing with congestion issues. We're in fact the world leader in ATM products and solutions, and I would like to mention that we are the only company with leading positions in the three segments: ground, airborne, and space. So that's an interesting positioning that has enabled us to actually study this question of optimizing traffic management from various standpoints. Well, I would just like to say that technology is certainly able to manage very dense areas. For example, Thales has equipped the very dense China Eastern corridors with Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. And the interesting thing is that even with technology that was deployed 10 years ago, these systems are still able to handle traffic density that's been multiplied by 2 since then. More recently, Singapore inaugurated their new generation LORAD 3 system. And this is certainly a very high performance system able to manage ATC in the busiest Southeast Asia hub at Changi International Airport, with a lot of focus on improving system automation performance, as well as, of course, maintaining a very high level of safety and security. Another example is Paris, France. Thales was selected in 2012 to deploy the new generation system for en route and approach. The traffic density there is about 3 million flights per year, so very dense. And as was said earlier, the question is not only an airspace issue, it's also on the ground. It's very important to also deploy very efficient technologies on the ground, arrival, departure management, surface management, as we've done in a number of airports. More specifically, in the Middle East, Thales is of course very much involved in deploying ATM systems. In this country, in Abu Dhabi airport, the turnkey ATM project, and other Middle East countries as well, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and a number of others. I think the issue of airspace fragmentation, as well as very high density on the ground, creates obvious constraints in terms of, congestions both in the air and on the ground. And going beyond technology things, I think the second word I was using, cooperation, becomes a very critical element. It was covered in your remarks as well. As we have seen in Europe, the notion of cooperation between players is essential. There are various schemes in terms of cooperation between air navigation service providers, airlines, suppliers, and I can get back to that in the questions if you wish, but we really believe that the important thing is a combination of deploying harmonized technologies as much as possible and going together with cooperation between the various players. We're a strong supporter of the ICAO Aviation System Block Unit framework. It's essential. Europe launched a very important initiative several years ago called CESAR, aiming at optimizing airspace capacity, increasing it. In fact, the forecast is to double capacity in Europe, or to double traffic in Europe by 2025. You also need to improve environmental performance, as well as continue to ensure a high level of safety. So you have CESAR in Europe, you have NextGen in the US. It was essential for ICAO to launch a framework initiative for the other regions of the world, and we are a strong supporter of this approach, because we believe the corresponding technologies, airborne, ground, are essential for a better way of managing very heavy traffic.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you on some of those points shortly, but I don't want to leave Kelly out of this discussion by any means. Kelly, you've got a lot of experience in terms of the avionics side of the industry. So what are your observations here from the avionics perspective with regard to the Middle East, and how can the avionics industry support the changes that are necessary in air traffic management? And perhaps you'd also reflect on the civil-military issues as well.
So this is a very important region. Anybody who plays in the supply chain, no matter where you play, is an important region with all the traffic growth and the number of aircraft coming into the region. And the avionics supply chain has been focused, not just Rockwell Collins, but the entire supply chain, on providing the capabilities in the modern aircraft that will allow the airplanes to fly efficiently. I think you saw in that little video clip, I thought that was fascinating, all the circles. Avionics doesn't want the airplanes flying in circles. We should be trying to get it straight in and straight out for efficient operation. And so with our OEMs, we've been providing the latest capability to allow these aircraft to fly more efficiently, and I'm encouraged that maybe we can take advantage, because one of the things the region has is a very modern fleet, and we can take advantage of some of these technologies. An avionics supplier, sometimes it's frustrating that the aircraft are equipped with capability that just can't be utilized because the system and the aircraft is just a node in the overall system, and we all need to work together to take advantage of these technologies that we can bring to the market.
Okay, and your experience in civil military? Are there any magic solutions there that can be?
I think civil military, you can do one of two things. You can isolate or you can interoperate. and we've decided to really focus on interoperate. And I heard some discussions about sharing the airspace, and I think that's where we need to go. That's going to require that we have the right capability in our military aircraft, ensuring that we have the latest CNS ATM type features in those aircraft, and we're investing in technologies to ensure as we upgrade, say a C-130 aircraft, it has the ability to interoperate and fly safely in that commercial airspace. I think ultimately we've got to get to that interoperable mode.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Jeff. I think you touched very much on our drive. It's taking advantage of the current modernization of the fleet. And I think that's our aim, that's what we're working to get. It's very important to mention also that the motive for different states is different from the others. In the UAE here, we have identified that the aviation is a great contributor to the economy of the country. We have Expo 2020 is coming up, but not only that, but the number of orders of the national carriers are all our motives to work harder and challenge ourselves to get the best out of everyone. Together, we cannot work in isolation. Airports, Airspace regulators, etc. But we need to take advantage from the modern fleet exists in the region. And having said that, that's also one of the pillars of the MAPE program, the Middle East ATM Enhancement Program, is the route network. The ATS route network exists today in the Middle East from India to northern Iraq. Is something that was designed back in 2002. And this is what we want to get out of the MAPE, is really to look at the route network from Jordan, UAE, across the whole region, and really design an airspace and ATS route network meets the avionics today exist at the states, most of them at least, but do it in a harmonized manner. Talking about the civil and military coordination, a few weeks ago we had a meeting with senior officials in the military here in the UAE, and we all agreed on a very important statement that we understand each other's requirements. They have their obligation to maintain. We have our mandate as well. But we both agreed that the traditional way of managing the airspace will not be good enough for either of us. And we agreed to proceed exploring further the idea of the flexible use of airspace. And it is my intention at the last quarter of this year is to have a high-level civil and military coordination conference where senior civilians and military personnel will be invited for this meeting. We're also exploring various initiatives and proposals, airspace proposals currently to implement partially flexible use of airspace. Talking about the technologies, yes, Thales is a great contributor to the ATM systems, etc. We have in the UAE a very modern system. We have safety net, we have arrival manager, we have departure manager, we have everything we need. We have prediction tools, we have ADSB, most of the modern technologies, we have them, but again, they will benefit us to a certain scale, but we have to ensure that our partners, our neighbors also have this. In the Middle East, we have a very unique situation, maybe does not exist elsewhere. We've been suffering and still suffering from the political unrest in the region. Looking at the huge airspaces of, for example, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, they've been subject to lots of political unrest, which makes the aviation officials there take the aviation interest low priority. We also have the embargo situation, where the fleets from, for example, Iran, Sudan, Syria could not be upgraded to meet the latest RNAV requirements. So these are challenges we are also facing within the Middle East, and we have to deploy certain initiatives to work around these challenges. At the end of the day, I always say that we have, in the UAE at least, we have adopted this culture within the National Airspace Committee, that we should not believe that we are the problem. We should always believe that we are part of the solution. And we keep continuously challenging ourselves to get the best, to achieve our strategies and objectives.
Okay, thanks. You've just stolen one of my punchlines at the end here about being the solution, not the problem. But there we are. Thank you. That was, I think, very clear. And I think we have reason to be optimistic about air traffic management in the Middle East. We do have the CAO roadmap, the ASBUs, the aviation system block upgrades there now. We do have the technologies and the capabilities around, and we've also, I believe, now got the mechanism in place for states and industry to talk to each other about the harmonized solution here. Ahmed, you've been very eloquent on the challenges that are behind that, which I have to say are quite a substantial hurdle to overcome yet. The rest of the panel, I mean, how do you see Ahmed's challenges here? How can you help from a technology point of view, avionics, from another air navigation service provider? Richard, would you like to?
Sure. I think there are a number of sort of keys to unlocking progress, really. I think Ahmed and Pascale have spoken about common standards. I think that's been hugely important because certainly that's one of the things that has held industry back in the past, and whether we're talking about block upgrades, some of the good work that's been done through ICAO, or some of the standardization through CESAR and NextGen, for example, that's all very much moving everyone in the right direction of systems being able to talk to each other easily, which is a hugely important step. And if I look at some of the work that we've been doing through what that unlocks, in the UK now, our arrival management process starts 500 miles away from the UK. And that's in collaboration with the French air navigation service providers, with the Irish and so on. Not only that, but we're now looking, again, using common standards so that we have what we call dynamic use of airspace. So the Irish have been controlling UK airspace and we've been controlling some of theirs. And that gives us the ability to be able to potentially close centres at night, reduce our operating costs, and just generally be more flexible. In addition, collaboration on specific projects such as fuel saving that then unlocks, where, over the past few years we've saved airlines 70,000 metric tons of fuel just by having more efficient routes because of that collaboration. And I think the more you can demonstrate savings, the more enthusiastic people get about it, the more the pressure and the expectation is there for your neighbours who aren't doing that to join the club. The first challenge, I think, is taking the first step, and that's really the difficult thing. But I think once you've done that, and once you've started to demonstrate the benefits, then expectations increase, but then so does the speed of the journey.
Okay, thanks, Richard. If I could just remind the audience to send in your questions. At the moment, the iPad is remarkably silent. We've got about 9 minutes left for this panel, so if you'd like to raise questions, please do so. Alternatively, please raise your hands, and we'll try to get a microphone to you. Pascale, just following on from Richard there, from the Thales point of view, what is it that you would like to see? That, how can the air navigation service providers in this region help you to help them? What needs to happen? What are the facilitators for you?
Well, what we would like to see is, I would say, an enhancement and, in fact, a strengthening of the cooperation initiatives that have been launched already. CANSO is obviously playing a great role in this area as an excellent vehicle to promote cooperation. Of course, the UAE as a country and Gulf countries overall have a big role to play in terms of deploying harmonized, unified solutions, if possible, throughout the region. And supporting this cooperation effort, I believe technology development, in particular in compliance with standards, is essential. So ASBU, as I mentioned earlier, is obviously playing a critical role. Of course, the Thales systems we have deployed in the region are compliant with the first block upgrade. Well, for those who maybe are a bit less familiar, this initiative is actually composed of 5 block upgrades, which each correspond to 5 years. We are currently in the first block, which is actually called Block 0, covering 2013 to 2018. And obviously, our product roadmaps are compatible with the next block upgrades. It's very efficient. It's very important to make sure that these kinds of harmonized, standardized technologies are deployed with the support of a very strong cooperation mechanism, meaning that countries can agree on common action, common targets, with the objective of obviously having a harmonized system with easier mechanism when you move from one NTC center to the next, and also making sure you can overall improve capacity, generate environmental gains, and reduce cost overall, the air navigation service costs.
Okay. Kelly, I imagine much of what Pascale has said applies to your part of the business as well. Are there any further reflections that you'd like to
You know,
make?
I think it's just really important that we continue, and I'll echo what Richard said, is to make sure we deliver common standards. We're implementing these features in many different aircraft types, and it's important that we work closely with the OEMs and the broad industry to make sure we're delivering a standard implementation irrespective of which airplane it is, so that when you have the opportunity to integrate the technology, you can do that in a seamless manner.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with both gentlemen as well. Richard, you're very right. There's one question you stated at the beginning of your remarks, Jeff, was will it be possible to see a common air navigation service provider in the region, or unifying service provision in the region? It could be possible between two states at least, but I do not see it at least in the near future due to the political issues in the region. However, what we try to achieve, even through the MABE as well, is to deploy common standards and common practices and rules to ensure smoothness in the delivery of the services. You also touched in your remarks about the separation between the service provider and the regulator. Well, in the UAE, we have two models living. We have service providers that are separated, totally separated from the regulator, like Dubai Air Navigation Services, for example. But we also have the service provider that is Sheikh Zayed Air Navigation Center, that is still part of the regulator. So both would work efficiently. It all depends how do you apply them. We have within the GCAA a functional separation between the regulator and the service provider, providing that the service provider has freedom and flexibility when it comes to budget and project management also. I'd like also to add a note related to Mr. Tufaha's statement earlier in the previous session with regards to the air traffic flow management unit in the region. Yes, air traffic flow management unit is beneficial and will add to the efficiency of the air traffic management. However, let's identify the air traffic flow management unit as it's a capacity management tool. It will not enhance your capacity. It will not enhance your capacity, but what it's going to do, it will just manage your capacity better. So in the region, if we do not enhance the capacity, if we do not deploy projects and systems to enhance the capacity, the air traffic flow management will not add much. All what we need to focus is enhancing the airport and the airspace capacity. Then we come to talk about air traffic flow management to manage this capacity.
Yeah, Richard, you've got quite a lot of experience in the UK with capacity constraints around airports, and also sort of some unexpected events and planned events like Olympics and so on. So what advice can you bring to this particular issue?
Yeah, just before I get on to that, perhaps I could just briefly pick up on another point around commonality, and that's, I think, the need for commonality around regulation. Because everyone often talks about commonality for technical standards, which is really important. But you know, one of the problems that air navigation service providers then have is that I could buy some kit from Thales, which would work well in France, but may not work well in the UK. And if I just take Europe as an example, we have over 40 different regulatory agencies, and we're aiming for one common sky. I mean, it's just not going to happen like that. And I think if we're talking about trying to, again, unlock some of these problems, the need to have a harmonized regulatory approach is key. There are plenty of global bodies out there, such as ICAO, for example, that set really good standards, European Aviation Safety Agency and so on. Let's try and really cut back on the number of regulatory agencies, because many times that just acts as a barrier to increasing capacity, I think, because of the complexity. Just picking up on the specifics of your question, Jeff, in terms of capacity management looking forward, I think, look, I'm not a politician. I have to do as the politicians say, but if it was my vote, I would be planning well in advance. As you know, we have some interesting debates going on at the moment around extra runway capacity. I don't think that the answer is going to be easy wherever you put it, but I think the longer you leave it, the more difficult it gets. What I would say, though, is that there's a lot of new innovation coming along, whether it's quieter engines from companies such as Rolls-Royce, or better approach techniques, or GPS-based navigation principles that all need to be brought into bear to solve some of these problems. So I think from that point of view, in terms of pure capacity, I think the technology side really does have a key role to play in terms of unlocking that conundrum. But I'll let you know the answer in about a year's time, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. We'll be back.
Sorry, just my last remark. I'll not be long. I think common standards very much rules, practices, interoperability of the systems, etc. Now, talking to Thales, I have the same discussion with other system providers, suppliers before. I think you have also responsibility as system developers to adopt some sort of cooperation and partnership with the other system developers, because the way we have at the moment, and one of the difficulties is that we quite often have different systems that cannot interoperate with each other. So this is something, I think it is time for the system developers like Thales, Raytheon, Comsoft, Indra, etc. to look at ways how could they make the systems much more interoperable. Now, standards-wise, I think the ANSPs are, and the states are also suffering the fact that the standards from ICAO quite often are too late to be provided. At the end of the day, the service provider applies what is the national regulations, which is based very much on the ICAO standards. In the UAE, we are very fortunate that our performance are based on performance-based regulations, and we have adopted very much a partnership spirit, where the regulator will be working very much together with the regulated entities like airports, airlines, and air navigation service providers to ensure that the regulations are workable and regulatable.
Okay, thank you very much. There have been no questions from the audience, so I'll sum up as we're just about to run out of time now. I think we've got a reasonable degree of optimism on the panel here, based on the facts that are in front of us. We know what we need to do in terms of the ICAO aviation system block upgrades. We know what we need to do operationally. We have the technologies and the systems there to do it. We've now set up a mechanism in the Middle East to look at the overall planning, and I was encouraged by Ahmed's comments that embraces the issues of standards, which has been very evident amongst us all, I think. So, I mean, one of the questions that my final question, which requires kind of a one-word answer from each of you, given the time, is that we've got a harmonized and seamless panel on stage here, but we all know that the successful projects in life always have had a champion behind there. Someone, you know, a body or an individual with the vision and the authority to move forward and make things happen. Ahmed, it's a difficult question for you, but I'll come to you first. Have you got enough with the setup you've now got in the Middle East? Is that sufficient, or do we need to engage in further advocacy to make this happen? How can we help you?
Okay. Project success normally is related to various reasons. One of the political commitment, which I think in the Middle East region it is there, because it is, we could see that at high level at the Ministers of Arab Transport pushing really. ECHO, for example, is also an entity pushing very much for ATM enhancement in the region. The UAE in this regard has proposed the MAPE, and probably it was the reason why the MAPE chairmanship has been delegated to the UAE. Right. I'm very optimist person by nature, but I'm very optimist also that the MAPE will be the umbrella that will take the region forward. I was pushing very hard, and I think it has been agreed that the MAPE will be composed not only by the states, which is very important, it will also be composed and steered by the international and regional organizations also. A success key is also the funding, and I think it has also been agreed that the MAPE will be funded by the states and the international organizations. So I think we have to be very careful drafting the next phase for the MAPE and the Middle East Enhancement Program to ensure that the success requirements have been considered and appropriately maintained.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very appropriate that we started and ended this particular session with Ahmed, but please join me in a round of applause for a great panel and for their thoughts. Nick?
Jeff, I'm tempted to ask you just before you leave, are you that optimistic as well, given your concerns you expressed earlier about the ability to overcome the difficulties of getting a consolidated position on ATM?
I am by nature an optimist,
Are you a pragmatist?
I've never been an optimist, particularly about transformation of air traffic management. But I think we've got the mechanisms in place, and I think you know, Ahmed's words were very encouraging there. That he sees those changes in the states, and we've got those processes in place. I'm optimistic that we'll get there. I'm not optimistic that we yet have the sense of urgency to make it happen as quickly as airlines and airports would wish it to be.
All right, no sense of urgency. That's what, for those of you who are leaving, the moderator, Jeff, has inputted into that discussion. Thanks very much.